It's going to probably be a very long and a very difficult night tonight. I've been enormously greedy, and I've tried to do an almost impossible amount, so Jenny put these together. I'll pass them around, and it'll be sure to distract your consciousness. She put together everything from the Michelangelo to a lot of other renditions or renderings of Adam and Eve. And some of them are quite powerful and moving. In fact, they don't go for the rib story, they do go for the side story, and they have a lot of Eves coming out of the side of Adam. So I didn't get a chance to get them put. I was going to tack them up here, but for tonight we'll just pass them around and everybody will give a look that way. Well, we have to recapitulate, and this is going to be something like 5 very difficult introductions. This is what the talk is going to be. This is a class about mysticism, or better, a class about reality as understood by mysticism. And mysticism is the study of existence from the inside out rather than from the outside in, as materialism does it. Actually, modern mysticism plays both sides of the street. We are employing the findings of the mystery schools to see whether they add anything to our understanding of given topics or of spiritual reality and how we live with it. It's also a class about mythology and the way the mysteries look at mythology. And that is as part or a remnant of a universal language of the soul. We are this year, and maybe going into next year, looking at myths on the origin of evil. We have begun with the Garden of Eden story as told in the Bible, and we're using the plain old King James Version. What we did last time is we began to study who all of the participants are in the story. We looked first at Adam and Eve, and tonight we're going to try and see, in terms of the mysteries, who the serpent is. Only we'll be just lucky in the last sentence to get to the serpent. And we'll have to carry on with that next time, because we have to go into an extremely enormous topic. And I have a mania. I have a mania for doing everything from the top down, always. And I have a mania that every time I do anything, it has to be completely new, or so that I get a new insight into it, or there's nothing worthwhile. To get to who the mysteries claim the serpent is, we have to go into something that for most people is every bit as fabulous and mysterious as the Garden of Eden. In fact, what we're going to go into is so colossal that human consciousness staggers under the gravamen of it. it is such a weighty talk, or it is such a weighty subject or word, I don't know how to put it, that it's exceedingly hard to understand. Not only is it profound, but it is almost infinitely complex, even as it's experienced. Because we experience a lot of things, and the experience of them seems simple, but when we try to describe that experience or explain that experience, things become extremely complicated. Well, even the experience itself is enormously complicated. What that is that we're going to speak of is the cosmology of the solar evolutionary creation in which we are participating. We're going to look at that evolutionary creation as it has been described and studied by seers from mystery schools of all ages and of all times, and they've come up with a pretty good view of it all. It's going to be somewhat long and pondersome, even though we're going to be looking basically in a really skeletal way. Everything is going to go very fast, and it's going to be very abbreviated, and it's going to be difficult. So we begin with something that everybody is familiar with, even though none of us really understands it at all. In fact, it is incapable of comprehension. It's something that we always talk about, even though we shouldn't, and that is the absolute. The absolute is beyond being, even though it is, while it isn't, because it could be. It's a very difficult thing. While it is, while it isn't, it is absolutely dense and absolutely rare. It is and it isn't so confounding that people who have spent all of their time pondering on the absolute have gone mad. People who worship the absolute go insane. A good historical example is Schopenhauer, that by pondering the Hannah's already. After the hour and a half or 2 hours of talk, Dan will give 4 hours of commentaries. He demands equal time. So it's a very confounding thing. But I realized when I was making the notes this time that in all of the renditions that I have given so far about the absolute, I have treated it as though it was something remote, as though it were something at a different time, a different state of being, a different kind of consciousness. So I'll try to be this time a little bit closer to daily living, because it's something that we deal with every day, every morning. We've said in the past that the mysteries have always referred to the absolute by either darkness or pure black or silence. when we listen in that inscrutable silence, we do participate in it with waking consciousness. That is, every day we know we are awake. We're clear, wide awake. No, maybe not so much in the morning. I'm defining myself right there as an owl rather than as a lark. And when we experience waking consciousness, we experience what seems a resistless and timeless and eternal state of being. Because we're awake. And in our waking consciousness, we're aware of the fact that we're awake, and it looks like we're never going to not be awake. It's, you know what I'm saying? That when you're awake, you can't believe that you're going to be unconscious. Because unconsciousness doesn't mean anything to you. In your waking consciousness, your awakeness does mean something. It has value. It has reality. However, we note that while we are self-conscious, that self-consciousness is in its self-awareness, increasing. That is, the more we pay attention, the more aware we become. That's what's really nice about the day wearing on, or life wearing on. We become more and more and more conscious, and we don't walk around in so much of a trance. Even at my age, I'm a better driver by far than I was 30 years ago, because I'm more awake and I'm more aware of what's going on. This automatically, in the process of being awake and aware, just paying attention, increases awakeness and awareness. And even without a break in waking consciousness, this produces a differential or a duality. We can say that I am more conscious now than I was before. However, we have to be really careful about that, because when we are self-conscious and when we are awake, the exclusiveness of that moment of awakeness makes it seem like this is the whole reality, and the awakeness that we had before wasn't as good as this because we aren't awake there now. But generally speaking, we can see that there is a differential or a duality in consciousness just from the continued experience of it. So, in being awake and knowing that we're awake, and we have those experiences. You know, sometimes we wake up in a dream and it's not really quite awake. And some people have those dreams where they wake themselves up in a dream, and then they wake themselves up within that, and they wake themselves up within that, and it goes on in an almost perpetual progression, not a regression, but a progression, so that there's a continuous waking up even in a dream. And there are even times that we're awake, that it seems to us that we aren't awake. We say, am I asleep? And we have to do some kind of a test to say that, am I awake? Because we don't really know. It's a difficult thing as can be. When we're dealing with, or when we're paying attention to being awake, being aware, being self-conscious, we're dealing with the most fundamental and basic experience that there can be. By degree, we are different from the one, but in character, being awake is being awake, whether it is being awake as a mere human being or as God. It's as fundamental as you can get. In this awakeness, we also have an awareness or a memory of a time when we weren't awake. And we have a recognition of a differential. This is going to be really hard to say. We know that we were less conscious or unconscious at a previous time. And we know that we're conscious now. But that must mean that our consciousness and the unconsciousness must share a common state. So waking consciousness and unconsciousness are just a transition within something that is in common to them. But it also isn't in common to them, because the word or the name that is common to both of them in one case it's unconscious, and in another case it is waking consciousness. And the transition from unconsciousness to waking consciousness is just a change within consciousness. There are all kinds. Consciousness is, in a way, the absolute. There are all kinds of consciousness. There is pre-consciousness, there's subconsciousness, there is unconsciousness, and they're all representations. There is superconsciousness. They all point to different states of consciousness, and the consciousness itself is unknowable completely. In fact, the deepest of all seers claim that the highest experience of consciousness is consciousness aware of consciousness as consciousness. I don't know if you're a man who wrote with very unusual language, Harold Waldwin Percival. I've got his books here on the shelf. Tries very hard to describe this in the deepest state of spirituality, and he has a tough time. So, what we're coming to is that unconsciousness, what is outside, even though there is something shared with waking self-consciousness, unconsciousness is outside of the experience and the knowledge of waking self-consciousness. We can know that there is a state or there is something that we are unconscious of, but what it is we can't know. It is outside of our experience. And so there is an automatic internal, external duality as soon as there is waking self-consciousness. We know that we are true. This is a terribly difficult duality to deal with. I see it all the time with astrologers and other people that communicate on the net, a lot of people have intuitive experiences. And they know that in the moment of those intuitive experiences that they're wide awake and that they know the truth. But they can't communicate it to someone outside of them, and because they can't share the experience, or they don't try to share it as an experience, what happens is that everyone that is outside then of that experience is in the dark. And you see like you get on the astrologers on the net, and you see an awful lot of people and they're really outright about it. Like, I'm the only one that's got the truth. And I'm always right every time I pick up a horoscope. It never fails. I can see that what you do fails. But there is you see what I'm trying to say? It's the inside-outside kind of consciousness, that sometimes reaches dangerous extremes, like it did a few years ago in Waco, Texas. Like, we are inside and we have the light, and all of the rest of the world or the darkness is trying to destroy us. So there is automatically a duality when we realize something is outside of our consciousness. However, we can... Ooh, I've got to be careful here because I have really hard notes. I have hard notes. They should be written almost like a book rather than as something that you flash over. However, from what we just said a moment ago, the unconsciousness can be internalized and is in fact internalized, because otherwise we could not become awake within ourselves, or we could not become conscious of something that we hadn't become conscious of before. If we were totally separate from everything that was outside of us, if the internal-external duality was completely and absolutely that way, there would never be any growth. But when we do come to know things that are apparently outside of us, and we come to a greater waking consciousness within our own being, we realize that the internal-external duality has in fact been internalized, that we have worked our way, or we have wormed our way into the duality. So this is an implied dualism, internal-external dualism, and to some extent we can even work with an intentional, illusionary duality. Let's pass on that. So implication is how we internalize duality or realize it within ourselves. Now, what we're trying to get to, from our experience, we have realized waking self-consciousness and a realization of having been at least less conscious to a realization of an implied unconsciousness of something that is outside of us, but that must also be inside of us, or else we couldn't have awakened to it. Now, it is extremely important in our own consciousness, or in the consciousness of the divine, that is the one, that we do have the dual or plural internal consciousness. Because if we do not have a differential consciousness within ourselves, that we cannot learn anything new. We cannot give, we cannot create. Because without that, we have a unity that is seamless. It is something that is impenetrable, irrefragable. It's a unity that is effete. There is no growth in that kind of consciousness. But once there is awareness of an internal duality, which means internal plurality, that means that difference can come in. Now, this is a really important thing, that unless we have this, there's certainty in unity. But once we have the potential for uncertainty, and once we have the potential for unknown things, or once we have the potential for an internalized unconsciousness, then we have the potential for something new, for waking consciousness. Now, it's really very, very beautiful because the unity of the consciousness, when we're wakingly self-conscious, provided we don't distract our attention, is in no way diminished or harmed by any kind of internal division. That is the waking consciousness, if we can keep our attention on it, is always there, no matter what is going on inside of it or as it appears projected outside of it. It still goes on. It's in no way harmed. The only way that it is lost is if we distract ourselves into the dualities, into the separations, and lose contact of it. In fact, we can see that the unity within itself grows more and more conscious. And so what happens is, one of the ways we lose it is we lose it by taking it for granted. You know what it is? That we're awake, and we take that, the greatest of all gifts, the thing that makes us equal with the divine, that allows us to share in the very essence of the entire creation, in the knowing that it was good. We take it for granted because it's always there. And to some extent, we almost seem to want to lose ourselves and chase after all of the divisions because we haven't come to realize the wonder of the oneness, and we treat it so blasé. If we can maintain a self-watching of the oneness, we can maintain a whole psychology of perpetual waking. And we can maintain a whole consciousness of wonder, of watching as things go on, because things are going to go on because of the general consciousness, but the more we are aware of the one, we will see what is going on within the one, right within our own creation. And we can have, if we keep our attention, a life of perpetual wonder. And this is so beautiful that it works even if the internal differentiation, even if the internal unconsciousness is illusionary, even if it is intentionally illusionary. That is to say, we can learn even if we play make-believe. It happens in your consciousness that if you lie to yourself enough, you believe the lie, and it becomes a reality in your own being. And in the process of evicting that lie or coming back to the truth of the matter, one that comes to new consciousness. In fact, even if somebody is lying to you, you're learning something very important about them. This is a form of an illusion, an internal illusion that still is productive of consciousness. Yes?
I'm kind of curious about the statement, implication of unconsciousness being realized in us. I can think of two examples where something could be called unconscious. Let's say we have a traumatic experience. We fight it, and so we're going to try to forget it. And
yep.
We're sitting at the typewriter writing a story or something. Another thing that's not conscious is after writing the story is the names of our aunts and uncles.
Mm-hmm. Right? Oh, I'm not saying that they don't exist.
Right.
I'm saying that they do.
What is the implication in that example?
Boy, all right. This is going to take me off from my notes, but we'll go into it anyway, and I hope I can get back in. I think the implication in general is unchanged. That is to say, if we can remember, see, we know consciousness. We don't know unconsciousness. We know when we wake in the morning, but we don't know when we go to sleep at night, because we have lost consciousness, or the process of awakening or knowing is no longer continued. But we do have memories. Like, for example, we can remember being conscious yesterday, and we know that there was a gap between yesterday and today, and that is the way that we come to know that there are some things that are not conscious to us. And it is possible, or let's take the example of a traumatic experience. That would be something that is repressedly subconscious, something that we don't want to admit, that we voluntarily try to hold into. We voluntarily lie and say we don't know this, we don't know this. And in the process of that, we're actually giving energy to that experience, and a traumatic experience is something that actually becomes stronger in the denial of it, so that eventually we have to become strong in confronting and admitting to it. So that the process of awakening, once something has been brought to us as an experience, the process of awakening cannot be denied. Anything that has at one time been fully wakingly self-conscious must come back again. It's because the truth of it is known, and no degree of lying can take it away. In fact, this would be the strongest arguments against the psychologists that would say that everything that we call the spiritual worlds, the psychologists would call part of the unconscious or the collective unconscious and such like that, and they would say you can't know that. And we would say that we must know that, because we experienced it in its being made, and to some extent we are awake to the tail of the dragon that's in the other room that is coming through a little mouse hole. And because we're aware of that, we eventually have to know the whole dragon, because part of the things that are in the spiritual worlds are in our waking consciousness, and we have to follow them back to their sources. So the fact that there are unknowns does not mean that they cannot or that they will not be known, but it means, in fact, that they will inevitably be known. Is that getting to what you're wanting to get to?
Yeah, but the gaps that follow between the states of consciousness, is that an implication that there is unconsciousness?
Oh.
It seems like there's an experience that's occurring.
Yeah, yes. Even if there isn't an experience, yes, that is an implication that there is something that we are unconscious of. That's how we come to know the duality. And when we bring that knowledge inside of us, that there are the gaps, that is how the duality is realized. Yeah, that's the very point that I'm trying to get to. It is the experience of going to sleep that makes the possibility of waking up all the more great, because between waking states we realize that there was something we didn't know, and then we have a differential between waking consciousness and unconsciousness. Okay, now we can go back to illusion or illusionary things. We said that a lie is a form of conscious illusion, and that we learn something even if we lie or even if we repress. Now here comes something that I don't fully understand, but there really is, in the waking of consciousness and the internal unknown objectified as a dream or as an illusion or something like that, there does not seem to be any arbitrariety. That is, if you ask anyone, I'll ask all of you right now if you want to, say something that is meaningless. You can't do it. It all relates to what we are. It is defined by what we are, and it's like saying, like our being, through that common venue of consciousness, is determining what is in the unconscious. So there's something very deterministic about waking, about creation. So that if we try to make up a lie or try to make up something that is completely meaningless or arbitrary, we in fact make something that is very meaningful, even though we didn't know it. We're saying things about ourselves that we didn't know in the first place. Most usually, we don't try to create lies. We try to create art. The creation in which we participate in is, in which we participate, I need that second in, what terrible grammar. The creation in which we participate is very much like an artist doing a painting and both knowing what the painting is going to be and not knowing. It's projecting a dream or a concept or an idea or a make-believe, and it's trying to realize it. And in the process of realizing, there is, again, the interaction with what is unknown. And that interaction with what is unknown through what we do know is where something new comes into creation. And in every creation, there is always that newness. If there isn't newness, it isn't a worthwhile thing. If you just do something rote, that's about the most mindless thing that a human being can do, is to just rote, repeat, and nothing comes out of it. All right, we have now looked at the transcendental notion of creation. When it is done on the cosmic scale, on the divine scale, it is highly purposeful, even much more purposeful than art is, and it's highly sacrificial in that the Spirit puts all that it has. The waking one consciousness puts all that it has into the creation, and the waking is a great activity. Some people call it fundamental creation. Some people call it the great experiment. But that's what we're now ready to talk about on a slightly more down-to-earth level, or a slightly more outward way, but not too much. There's one point we want to look at, and that is that the duality within and beyond the one that pervades the experience of waking consciousness the description of that experience, and even the potential of that experience are all dual. We sort of saw that, or that was implicit in what we were saying when we talked about the external and internal duality. Again, we don't experience sleep, and we don't experience unconsciousness. We do know when we awake, and we do remember reaching a greater state of awareness. And so we surmise or we infer that we have been asleep. From this, we surmise a waking state and a non-waking state. Now, in doing that, we must infer that there had to be a potential such that we couldn't have come to be awake, or else we wouldn't have awakened. You know what I'm trying to say? All right. It's very difficult. There must have been a potential to be awake such that we could have been awake, or else we wouldn't have become awake without that potential. It has to be there. Now, if you look at that, we see then that there is a state of being unconscious and a state of being conscious, and something that is in between them that is the potential to be either unconscious or conscious. That potential, when we're talking about it in terms of state, we call space. There's a state of being and there's a state of non-being. They are static, or that is, static. There is also the potential of change. We change. Some people wake up more slowly than others. So there is a potential of change so that we wake up from being unconscious to conscious. So there had to be a potential state of change in order to go from the dynamic unconscious to the dynamic conscious, where we are perpetually awake. That potential that allows for an active change of state we call time. There is a place or a state where I am awake, and there's a state or a place where I am asleep. And there is a change of consciousness where before I was unconscious and now I am conscious, or before I was less conscious and now I am more conscious. So this dynamic potential is what we call time. So everything from the unknown, from the absolute, from the unconscious to the most wide awake consciousness, whether it is internal or external, passes through or is made possible by a potential. And that potential has in itself dualistically two elements. A moving element or a dynamic element that we call time, and a state or an unchanging or a state of being aspect to it or attribute to it, I don't know what words to use, that we call space. All right, I think that's all pretty clear. That we're not just talking words here. I'm really serious and earnest about this, because so often this can be just word talk. But for example, a person was once asked a very wise individual how do I become clairvoyant. I believe that there are seers, and I would like to become one of them. And the instructions were given in one sentence. Do everything that you do with complete and total self-consciousness. If you do everything wakingly, deliberately, freely, intentionally in your self-consciousness, you are automatically putting your attention into the state of spirit whereby you are God, and that allows you to be enough in touch with that unity, that light, that knowing that penetrates everything, that you do indeed see through everything, no matter what its state or no matter what kind of change it may be going through. So you can take these as word games if you want, and you can get it all. Philosophers, they write whole books and polemics on how the other one is a fool for looking at it with existentialism in this way or that way. And you can get into that, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about living something like this, which is something really, really hard to do. Okay. So we have two potentials, two states, and there are two ways of looking at oneness. The one with oneness that we know in self-consciousness, and then there is a para. Physicists, for example, that would make something like this talk seems something like the talk of a piker that didn't know anything. They talk about the consciousness of the oneness as Brahm, and the potential as it goes into the oneness or the consciousness as we're describing it, both conscious and unconscious, and they call that Parabrahm. Shared will probably give the second 4 hours of commentaries. I would almost like to do that sometime. Yes?
Okay, not to take you off again, but I just you seem to have a potential that's between unconsciousness and consciousness.
Yes.
And I want to use an analogy from physics.
Okay.
Maybe it doesn't have to be that way. There's the potential energy, let's say, of a rock, that when you lift it above where it was at rest, it increases its potential energy.
Yes.
And they measure it, perhaps, sort of guessing here, someone knows physics to know, from the center of gravity.
Mm-hmm.
To measure your gravitational energy or gravitational value, right? And if you brought the object down to the center of gravity, right, then there would be no point from which to measure. It would be there.
At least relative to the Earth, there would be no point to measure.
Well,
relative to somewhere else.
Assuming our physics is measuring potential energy from the Earth, right? That's a good concept of potential. And then we wouldn't have potential anymore, and so the concept would be nugatory. And let's make the analogy then that the state of unconsciousness is the center of gravity.
Yes, that is perfectly agreeable to me. That is perfect. What you're describing is a deliberate potentiality. And I think what I'm talking about in an absolute sense is an indeliberate potentiality because it is basically unknown. In fact, everything that you're saying as the center of gravity, that the point of the absolute, that all of us, when we're talking, let's talk theosophical or Rosicrucian or anthroposophical lingo now. We're trying to talk about this experientially. And the statement made by seers is that each one of us has our own connection to the Absolute. And that connection to the Absolute is where each in our being, it's a point that isn't a point, that goes into space, it goes into potential becoming or potential being. And strangely enough, that center of non-being, or that center that is our connection with the Absolute or with all consciousness, is in fact associated with the center of gravity. Strangely enough, in the human being, it is right near the root of the nose inwardly, such that you can, by putting a finger on somebody's forehead, just with one finger and holding it on the forehead, they have a hard time getting up because you have dominated their center of gravity. And for the spirit of the earth, where the center of gravity is where the center of creation for the collective earth spirit is centered. And what you're talking about potential, in even just a mere material or brute physical sense about a center of gravity, it's beautiful that it works that way, just as it works in our highest consciousness, that if we look within and look to a darkness or to a center, our attention does go to a dark, like a center of gravity where everything is still and everything is silent and anything could be, and we listen, but we listen in an active listening that does bring something into existence. I like the analogy a lot. The fact that you actually put it in real physics terms is good, because otherwise I get too philosophical and miss a lot of those things. All right, we're done with the, well, where are we here? All right. Yeah, we were at Parabram, and we were at the point that that potential is dual, just as reality is dual, and we can't say anything more to that. Now, the thing that I don't know enough about this, because if I did know this, I would be semi-divine. But for the next few sentences now, it's going to be something very, very difficult. Once waking has begun, it is voluntary. We choose to wake. We choose to live. It is very hard once a person has come to the realization that it is a glorious and divine experience to be awake, and we realize that there is light or more light. It's very hard to turn somebody off from that. I'd say it's probably one of the most impossible things of all to do. We voluntarily choose to wake. So volition and freedom in choice is more associated with the spirit that is intensively in the knowing state, and that is associated with time. Whereas what we don't know and what seems to resist our knowing, either actively or passively, seems to be extensive and externalized outside of ourselves. And therefore, it appears that the states of matter in the continuity between spirit and matter, because we're talking about a duality, we're not just talking about a black and white duality, we're talking about a duality where everything is a continuum between consciousness and unconsciousness, and between spirit and matter, and between space and time. But what is more unconscious, or what is a representation of the projected unknown as a lie or an illusion or a creative dream, the unknown is matter, and it is more in space. since this is a duality within a continuous oneness, I suppose that's reversible, and you could look at spirit as the unknown and matter as the known, but I've never found that to be very fruitful, at least not in terms of the experience of waking. So it's, all right. Now we're past the second introduction, and now we're about ready to go into, or trying to make our way. We're all done with the abstract stuff now, and we start going into the actual stuff of waking up within the evolutionary creation. The evolutionary creation in which we participate is an orderly, a rhythmic, and an extremely intentional or purposeful projection by the one or by the unity into the unknown through space-time for a progressive waking. Like, we are somewhat chancy about it. We don't live lives with that kind of purposefulness. We don't live lives that are that balanced and that orderly and that have that much variety in. But the creation in which we live is very purposeful, and it, in a balanced, rhythmic, organic way, projects its meditation, its dream, what it doesn't know, into the unknown in a very regular, even way. As it is understood, it isn't understood in the living of it or in the carrying out of the creation. It isn't understood as a duality. It is understood more in its tertiary sense and its quaternary sense and its septenary sense. But we'll just say that and then pass on, because there are other things that we want to get to. The whole process is dualistic in that there are two stages, and in those stages, in the macrocosm and phased off at various levels of microcosm within, the spirit involves into matter and is materialized. In the second phase, or half of it all, or stage of it all, the spirit evolves and matter is spiritualized. So there is the materialization of spirit, you might say, through the dream, and there is the spiritualization of matter by living through the dream and realizing it. And in all of this, there is a general awakening of consciousness. So it is still a polar kind of projection. Now, this is accomplished through the dual potential, as it has to be. That is, there are what are called periods of time. And at the same time that there are periods of time, well, there are, how would you say it? Forms of space. That in most jargon are called globes. And I think that happens to be an unfortunate choice of words, but that is how things are done. So there are periods of time, and how would you say it? And along with the periods of time, there are forms of space. And within them is the continuum of the spirit-matter pole. That is what fills the potential, or the polar potential. The periods of time are said to be septenary. And the globes are said to be septenary. Now, I don't want to go into the reasons for the septenariness because it would take another hour. Let's...
There's 5 conscious dimensions and 7 unconscious. So there's got to be 12, but that's everything.
I'll pass. I would want to be extremely rigorous in terms of internal conscious experience, or I couldn't do it. All right. Each of these 7 periods of time and the 7 forms of space is given a name that is planetary. That is, I'm going to give you the Western names: Saturn, Sun, Moon, Earth, Jupiter, Venus, Vulcan. Unfortunately, planetary names were chosen because they are the best, but they don't mean planets. They mean character of consciousness. If one begins to study astrology, one realizes that there are states of consciousness that are Saturnine in character. And when that Saturnine character can be applied to a state of space and form, in saying that something is stony and mineral-like in its Saturnineness. Or you can say that it is something concentrated and dark in its spiritual consciousness in time. And that is Saturnine in a higher sense. So when we're talking about periods of time and forms of space within this general balanced rhythmic creation, everything, all of the different forms of space and corresponding periods of time have planetary names because the planets represent the names of given types of character, and that character pervades in a number of ways the forms or the periods of time. Now, the spirit-matter pole goes from the rarest state, that is the spirit of spirit, which is totally internal, which is sometimes called the realm of God. And there's a state of virgin spirit, which we'll talk about in a little bit, the state of divine spirit, a state of life spirit, and then a state of thought, abstract thought, concrete thought, a state of desire, and a state of physical matter. And this is etheric. There's another division here, and chemical. in the chemical state, in the same way that this is the spirit of spirit. This is the outsideness. This is completely outside. I don't know how you can say it. This is the big break. Everything above this is called transcendent. Everything beneath this is called phenomenal. If you like, in the great alchemical work by Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, commonly known as Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, who's commonly called Paracelsus, wrote this grand book that talks about all of this, but it's described as an alchemy book. These are this is gold, silver, mercury, quicksilver. What do we have here? Copper, tin, iron, lead. So that the whole alchemical process is taking lead, the lead of unconsciousness as it is condensed in the unknown, in matter, and spiritualizing matter is the process of turning base metals into gold. And it's a whole development of consciousness. But I fear that I'm at a place where I could drastically leave my notes, and I just don't want to do that. In this projection of the dream, in this manifestation of the creative idea, in these periods of time and of space, the one consciousness projects itself outward, and it comes back in and outward and back in, meaning to say that it revolves, since state of consciousness is always known by rotation. Something rotating one way is involutionary, and something rotating another way is evolutionary. And there's a distinct kind of consciousness that one experiences, that distinct state of spin that is associated with consciousness. All right, so that what we're having, this is, if you'll note in your any kind of meditation or any kind of creative work that you do, you will find yourself going deeper and deeper into it, and then withdrawing, and then going deeper yet, and withdrawing, and then going deeper yet, and withdrawing. It is something like our meditation, but except in terms of only turning inwards, it is both turning outward and inward at the same time. And so the cosmos is something that manifests from an inner state of having not been there to being more there, to being more there, to being more there, and then it draws back in, and there's a general revolution of consciousness, or seven such revolutions in each period through all of these globes. I don't want to make it sound like it's, like that's an orrery or something like that, because that's not what our experience is. All told, these revolutions really are revolutions because they represent radical changes. And when you go through all of the periods and all of the globes, and this is a very skeletal thing because there are subdivisions that go within this, it's so tremendously complex that I don't know of any human being right now that can hold the whole thing in their consciousness, that there are, when things are phased off and one goes through all of these different kinds of states of consciousness, just walk out in nature from one day to the next in autumn like now. The leaves are changing so that each day it's a different, everything looks totally different. And this is just the physical plane, and this is just a very minute time in the physical plane, to say nothing of totally different states of consciousness that we're looking at from so many different angles and from so many different revolutions, so that what is happening is a very radical revolution of experience in consciousness, because this is what happens. The more we are awake in the spirit, we can know the same thing, and it has millions and millions and millions of different facets to it. It is, it has all of these different sides to it, and that is all of the potential of waking consciousness and all of the possible variants of it. It's unlimited within waking consciousness, and a creative process that has all of these variants in it wakes up all of the different potentials that the spirit is capable of at a given time, whether it's in one life or whether it's in the whole creation. So what we're talking about is something extremely, oh my God, we're only halfway through the notes, not even. We may have to break. We may not even get to the snake tonight. Yeah. Now, in this whole process, when the one divides within itself, it doesn't just divide into states of matter. It isn't like, that's water and that's earth. It never loses its consciousness. Within itself, there are living beings. Like all of the different states of existence are gods. We talked about that a little bit the last time when we were talking about the Elohim. Going as deep as one can go into the spirit, some seers have claimed that there are 40 million kingdoms. Not 40 million kinds of beings. That would be a pittance. But 40 million kingdoms, like there are humans and angels and archangels, and you just keep going on and on and on like that. Plants and animals, 40 million kingdoms. So that what happens is the creation is carried out. This is not deism, and it's not a theism. The creation is carried out within the unity of spirit, the spirit of spirit, but it is carried out within by spiritual beings so that that one unity is never lost. See, the divine always never loses it. I lose possession of myself, I don't know, countless number of times in a day. Even in a talk like this, it's pretty clear that it's very hard for me to keep it all together. It's really quite a thing to keep the spirit on our consciousness at all times. So, there are all these beings that are themselves growing and waking in creation as the work is being carried out. But there are beings that are associated with the unknown, that belong more to the matter and more to the forms and more to the unconscious, that are not self-consciously participating in it, and they are creatures. So we have creators and creatures all mutually complementing each other, so that the needs of the creatures brings out the divine generosity and creativity of the creators. Because this isn't just a big make-believe game only for make-believe. There's something here that every living being has its need. Either its need to give and to serve, or its need even to resist. In the case of the stone, the building, the walls would crumble if the stone didn't provide its resistance to hold it all together. And so what we're talking about is an amazingly complex thing. We're talking then about many varieties and states of being that are themselves, it's like a gigantic cord that has many subcords within it and many strands within it, and they all are the cord that goes from pure spirit that is totally within and inner, right down to the unconsciousness of single atoms that have only form, and that is their participation is to be that. All right, now we have sort of a rough idea of what is taking place, and now we're ready to begin to come a little bit more down. We're not too far from the snakes now. We're just 3 days away from the snakes. Only not these kinds not these kinds of days. The first period of time with the 7 forms of space that are externalized and internalized is called Saturn. It so happens, now we're going to look at this primarily from the viewpoint of human beings, because if we try to look at it in terms of all the participants, it would be enormous. I don't think I'd have enough time in the rest of my life if I could talk continuously as long as I would live. I'd have to eat well, and maybe they put an IV in me and I could just talk continuously for the rest. There's no way I could possibly say it all in the rest of my life if I lived another 40 years. Like my father has been privileged. He's 30-some years older than I am. In the period of time and the forms that we went through first, which is called Saturn, we began our evolution with the cosmos. Now, not everybody began. Some had begun in other manifestations. It's like, there's some things that we started 2 weeks ago, and then or yesterday, and we go to sleep and we come again. There are some things that are phased off in startings of times. So what is now humanity began its evolution or participation in the Saturn period. And before we could begin, because we were the most humble, we were in what is called a mineral-like state of existence. But since this was the beginning, before there could be a mineral-like state of existence, there had to be a space to receive minerals. And there had to be a time in which the periods could take place. And this is very difficult stuff. All of this took place. We were differentiated as points within Virgin Spirit cosmic root substance. I don't know how to go into saying this. The more one goes into the Spirit, the more time and space are as one, and spirit and matter are as one. So the state of Virgin Spirit is a spiritual state that is so close to pure being that it could be anything without being contaminated or losing its consciousness to what it is. Cosmic root substance is a state of matter that is like mathematical space. It is where all of the points are continuously connected. So the beginning of the creation was done by beings of a very high order called Xenophem and Teraphim. And basically what they did is made possible by choosing the spiritual states and potential beings that could be the focus of those states, and by choosing out of all of you can't have all of the points at one time. If you had all of the points at one time, you'd again have the unity. You know what I mean? There would be no division. There would be no progressive consciousness. And so you have the division. And so there are some selected areas of space matter. Boy, we're really in something very, very, very difficult. So cosmic root substance and virgin spirit are, it seems, a name for exactly the same thing. So the virgin quality means that it is virgin in that it is itself untouched while yet being capable of evolutionary experience. This is what virgin birth means. It's one who has the experiences or is capable of the experience, but is not in the limited nature of the experience. That is, a virgin birth is somebody who is conceived where the sexual act is not done in personal passion, but it is realized from a higher state of spiritual consciousness, and there is an element of spiritual purity, and that the organism begins its journey into the material world surrounded by a consciousness that is more like a creative gift than it is like a personal taking or satisfaction in pleasure or something like that. The whole idea of, this is like the whole idea of Virgo, which is a virgin earth, that the earth in a very pure way allows everything to grow in it. Now, there are several different, beside the many kingdoms, there are several groupings of creative beings. There are some beings that create completely voluntarily. They don't have to participate. They create purely out of love and out of voluntary creative urge to wake or to share the wakingness. But these beings participated indirectly, and that is that they just made the conditions and they didn't participate right in the consciousness of the evolving beings. There are other beings that also give freely, but they participate right in the process. There are artists that got their hands in the paints or in the stuff that becomes the forms. Then there are beings like us that we're part of the gods now, that we're in it and we're partially voluntary, but it's necessary for us in order to grow. We're committed and we have to grow. And so I'm just trying to differentiate the kind of consciousness. I can see people are getting tired. So far, I'm not doing too bad as far as tiredness is concerned. I don't know what's going on here. So what happened is these beings, because they worked indirectly and voluntarily at the same time, they were able to create a universe that had for them no cling. And so that at the same time that the universe was going down, it's like action and reaction. They were transcending creation and going deeper into the absolute to prepare for some other more glorious kind of creation. So there's a action-reaction that takes place on the deepest levels of creativity, so that when you distance yourself from your creative activity, when you transcend and you allow it to go on its own course and out into the world, by that same action you rise. This is something that people, that parents, realize all the time, that in watching children grow up, when you leave them go on their own, they take their own course, and they're going to make the same mistakes that you made, but in giving them that freedom or watching them in their freedom, you yourself rise and you learn things that you never learned when you were going through the whole process of parenthood yourself. And something like that is a principle that seems to work throughout the cosmos. So, what was to become us as human beings were plunged from a state of virgin consciousness in which there was an all consciousness near to the consciousness of God, but it wasn't self-conscious. It wasn't objective. We didn't know what was going on, but yet we did know everything. It's a most unusual thing, and we were plunged into a Saturnine darkness. That is to say that we were plunged into states of matter that relative to this virgin state must have been exceedingly jarring. What comes to mind for me is sort of like, it's not a perfect picture, but if you've ever been around a blacksmith where they get the iron red hot and is capable of being formed, but so that it doesn't lose its temper, they stick it into water, and there's all of that boiling and something such like that. That's something like what our immersion into the space-time, spirit, matter, creative activity was like. The rare thing is I don't want to go into the reason for this now. We may get to it later tonight or maybe the next time we meet. But we usually go through 4 of these, in these revolutions, we usually go through 4 of these worlds. And so our revolving was between the state of divine spirit, which is something we rarely experience because we rarely express will because it's so rare. And the densest we were when we were mineral-like was like a concrete thought. And even in concrete thinking, we're very minimal in our capabilities right now. But so our immersion, though it must have seemed like the iron bar being jammed into the water with all of the boiling and everything else going on, seemed like a gross change of state or a gross change of experience, it still is almost beyond our experience now in the relative subtlety of it. So we're talking about something really, really extremely subtle. These are, this is called second heaven. So we're talking about second heaven, third heaven, fourth heaven, fifth heaven. And none of us, at least not I, haven't even experienced first heaven in a completely waking state. All right. So, the cosmos at this time, relative to the state of virgin spirit, was dark. And even relative to these realms as they are now, it was dark. Meaning to say that there wasn't yet waking consciousness. And I think when I ponder on it or I try to hold it in my consciousness, it is just like when you are thinking on a new subject that you haven't thought on before. When you're waking up to it, maybe just the first few years of thinking on it, it feels dark. Nothing seems to dawn on you. It seems like a fruitless meditation, or, even in your daily meditation, or even in a prayer period. The first time you spiral into a prayer, it seems like you're getting nowhere. You know what I mean? It seems like dense, and that's what the Saturn period experience was like for us. It was dark. And even though in our mineral-like state we were learning to take forms, the forms were very indistinct. And in that sense, globes were globular, probably is the best description for it. And so like we experienced these forms. Now there were beings that were in a human-like stage. That is, they were passing from being creatures to becoming creators, just like we are at this early time. They obviously started on some other day's work in some other creation and continued on later on. And they're called in the Bible, if you want to know, they're called the powers. In some forms of esotericism, they're called the lords of mind. And some folks call them, according to the Greek terminology, archai. And so we were worked on. But since the cosmos was only as dense as concrete thought. We were worked on by thought. And this thought was projected on us or into us in our form-like state almost as words. Because the experience of thought is the experience of pitch. And so the words were emanated to us. And if we resisted too much, so that there were echoes, that the dream became fragmented, sort of like in a vague way, like the way an image becomes fragmented when the water becomes choppy. And this is where the myth of Saturn slaying its children comes from. That's one of the meanings of that. So we are in a Saturnine darkness, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't a light there. It means that it was a dark light. And it was a dark light that is sort of like an invisible heat. In fact, it was probably more intense than a visible light. Now, it is a principle that for creatures anyway, but I think it may be universal, that one experiences first and then understands or develops a creative power later. So in these revolutions, inwardly and outwardly, we develop the ability to take form first by being formed. And our value to the cosmos was the ability to hold a form in a Saturnine, this is mine kind of way. And after we had experienced all of these revolutions of consciousness where we held form, imbued somewhere in our spiritual potential by very, very high beings that are sometimes called the Lords of the Flame, but that term is used in different ways by different schools, so I'm hesitant to throw it out that way. What was imbued in the spiritual pole, not the physical or the material or the form pole, was the whole idea of will. That is, by providing resistance to hold the form, the potential of having the will to make a form or to do anything was developed from that kind of experience. And that was at the very end of the Saturn period. See, I told you this is going to be a gigantic fairy tale, and you can take it all as that. You don't have to take this as this is the truth. There are, all the principles in it are useful and helpful, but you don't have to take it as the truth if it's going to strain your credulity too much. That's not insisted upon. So that was in the first period of creation. That was what was what. This is what was when we looked at the Bible the last time. We said it was dark and without form. It was indeed dark. Even though it's more, even if we were to experience that now, it would be bright beyond our highest conception. But, and we weren't without form, it was just that the form was more like the way night is formed out of darkness. It was that kind of a form. The forms were very vague. Yes? Yeah. No, it's talking about something far beyond that. But it applies very well, because once you have the principle of analogy, in any circumstance, the principle of analogy works throughout the entire cosmos. The first 5 verses of John are more fundamental to all creation, even beyond the solar cosmos. The analogy works very well. This is going to be exceedingly scorpionic, and I don't mean it to be anything gross. But sex is a form of a creative or procreative act. And everything that we're talking about of being unknown and wanting a creative fulfillment or something to give to and to have a gyrating kind of experience of going in and out very much from 2 points of view. The sexual act is in a small way a reproduction of the great creative action. This is why I believe so many people make almost a religion out of it. They don't realize that it is really a religious experience. It can be carried out in full consciousness, and it could be like an initiatory experience where you could relive this in full waking consciousness if it weren't so much a thing of people either wanting to fall asleep or lose themselves in the dark sleep of orgasm, or lose themselves into personal pleasure and divorce themselves from the reality. But the same principle is there. Oh boy. All right. Then the whole cosmos went to sleep. Just like with days. And then came the sun period. Now, nothing is lost. In the sun period, everything went a degree deeper rather than where they had been in the Saturn period. In fact, these realms didn't even exist yet. There's no use to create something unless you're going to use it. Just like for us, most of these realms are latent because all of our activity is down here between lives. We get a little bit in the realm of abstract thought, but almost all of our consciousness is in the lower outer realms. Now, what happens in sleep is very much like what happens again in prayer or in concentration or in meditation. Like if we go into something deeper and deeper and deeper, this is a very active, very concentrated giving process. When we withdraw, it seems as if we take all of our experience and pull it back with us into unconsciousness. And it is in the moments after the concentrated experience where we let go and just let everything dissolve out of that focus that then the inner meaning comes to us. And so the period of a night between days is described as being a period of great activity where everything is brought to light within the greater unity that has been drawn out of the active, concentrated living experience. Now, mind you, if we went through all kinds of forms during all of these revolutions and people who were working on us, continuously and regularly, and this was focused on our becoming consciousness, the ability to experience a number of forms realized within the one was born in the next period as the ability to realize one form that had a progressive shape. And the one form that had a progressive shape and had the ability to live and grow into that progressive shape is a plant. So there was a change in consciousness so where the idea of form to the ramification and extension of forms, so you don't have to make a whole bunch of forms, but you can just make one and carry that progressive idea on and on and on, is what we learned in the second or the sun period, and we were plant-like. We were still worked on, but we were plant-like. Now, before I get too far from the notes, we're actually going to might make it yet. We're only on page 6 of 8 of the notes. I may quit after this, though, and we'll pick up from here next time. We've even skipped a lot of the notes, I'm sad to say, because I had so much that I wanted to say that I should have realized it just wasn't possible. Now, something similar happened in spirit. When the spirit realized itself relative to the unknown and manifest itself in a pure being, its first self-recognition was just an assertion or a state of will. And it was dark, like a concentration. There was a lot of power. There was a lot of heat, you might say, from the sacrifice of giving itself to all of this resistance. But when it mulled it over, it could come to lucid light. That the realization of being to non-being is like the realization of, how to say it, of being relative to a dark virgin mother. But when that becomes internalized and we become self-conscious, it becomes in the other direction, the realization of will relative to the beginning of light that forms itself around the assertion, around the statement of being. So the cosmos, so the first statement is a statement of divine will. And what happens is the external feminine or the absolute feminine becomes projected as the manifest feminine. And it is then will relative to imagination. I have a better way to say it. It is the difference between dark assertion and lucid light. Again, if we take it in our internal experiences, before we come to definite thoughts, things begin to dawn on us. There is light within which specifics can be born. And this is what happened in the cosmos. And this is like a state where being comes to the potentiality of selfness. It has the potentiality of spiritual life. This is what is dawning on the waking consciousness. And so then it's hard to say whether the spiritual feminine is drawing out the will and taking the light by forming itself. This happens on the simplest levels. If you project any type of energy, a field forms around it. If you form a field, you can bring a projection of energy through it. So it is not clear whether it is the internal feminine drawing the masculine will on, or whether it is the masculine will impressing into the imagination. But out of this union, this is again now a union where there is lucid light, that there is a beginning of knowing. And so the capability of producing concepts or things or anything comes out, just like light, like the relationship of sunlight to everything that grows and exists in sunlight is like the relationship of the spiritual light to all of the conceptions, thoughts, and ideas that the consciousness of the cosmos was going through at this time. This is why the reason that this period is called sun is because it has that character. We took that, our highest experience at that time was the life spirit. That was taken by us in a reflective projection, and we became like plants, and we emanated a kind of vitality, but the vitality that we emanated was made of desire. And so it was made of thought, and it reflected through a desire body. So the whole cosmos was as light as the lucidity when we have an idea, not the idea itself, but the knowing of truth in which that idea or principle is formed, was the rare kind of light, and the denser kind of light was the kind of light that we have, that is called the astral light, or the light of love attraction. All right, and so we went through this plant-like state. I'm trying to cut this down a great deal because otherwise it's going to be infinitely long. Now we come to another pair of conceptions. That is stages and phases. The stages are, we've been talking to some extent about them, mineral, plant, animal, human, angelic, archangelic, power-like. Should put a like on each of these because it's different. And the creation is something that is ongoing and perpetual. Because as we became plant-like, there had to be something for us to live in. And so there was a new mineral kingdom, and that new mineral kingdom is what is now the plant kingdom. So they were like minerals made out of desire instead of minerals that were made out of concrete thought. And so they were in the mineral-like stage, but they were one phase behind us. This gets enormously complex because I don't know of anybody who's ever carried it all out. I've carried it out a few notions of it, and it's always extremely fruitful. But if you understand the kinds of beings that are going to come into existence according to their phase relationship of state, you understand the nature of the cosmos, you understand the nature of those kinds of beings, and you get another facet of the whole consciousness of the divine, and it's really a beautiful thing to do, and it shows how different things in the creation come to fulfillment. It's something that I gave talks a few years ago for about 2 or 3 years on cosmology, and I could go back again and I could do them all over, and it would be about 5 years now, and it still wouldn't get anywhere. All right. Geez, I would really like to finish this, but I absolutely cannot. So let's just about break from here and say that at the end, or near the end, in the first and second revolutions, we recapitulated the mineral-like state and began the plant-like state. And in the sixth revolution, we awakened the potential. We didn't awaken, we had imbued within us from the experience of growing and of changing and of providing life. We awakened or imbued within our being a potential of spiritual consciousness, that we could have that kind of imagination, that could imagine any form without being that form, that we would consciously come into our life spirit, and we would maintain our life by shucking off more and more forms that weren't life. The life spirit, for this reason, is sometimes called the void, because it has a continuity between all of the different differentiations that come out of it, but which isn't it. And it is a void because it becomes more itself by throwing off what it isn't. And it's a very, very profound principle. like all things feminine, it has that paradoxical kind of quality that it has great fullness in its emptiness, and the potential of us to understand a common love or a common sympathy or a common truth with everything in the cosmos was born with that life spirit state. And I think we'll take a break there because I realize this is going on much too long, and I don't think I could do it in less than 45 minutes, and I don't want to do a 3-hour talk. It would have to take that, and we'll just continue from there next time, and we'll get actually to the serpent, and we'll talk about snake lore next time. I've come across some very unusual ideas about snake lore and evolution that I think are unique, but I'm not going to bet on it because somebody's going to say, "Oh, Steiner knew it years ago." But and we're going to talk about the experience of fire and water in nature, outer and inner, and we're going to talk about the snake. We'll get there next time. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that I had prepared that overly much. Oh, now we're ready for your 2 hours of commentary.
Well, it begins with this. You may not have mentioned the snake, but you did make a reference to the dragon's tail.
Gotcha. Thanks.
In some area, the next being that comes into existence, or the next group of beings or plants. Is that correct? Or?
We were the plants, but who are now the animals began at a mineral-like state. Yes. No, we were plant-like. No, I would. Yes. I would like to see a lot of things more about all of these things, but I just have to be forbearant because it would get ultra long, and I just can't allow that, I guess.
When you're talking about the consciousness of consciousness and the potential in time for going from one to the other, and the potential in space of being either one or the other, that's almost like saying that potential is a higher form of existence than either two.
Yes.
Is this like when one talks about polarities, where you have polarities of the first and second order, and you have the potential for both together? And the two
Yes.
So time is the two separately, and the space is the two together.
Well, it's time-space all together, but they do bifurcate in their own way. That's why that conception of virgin spirit cosmic root substance is so hard to understand, because you're so close to unity that the two poles of potential are hard to differentiate, and even more so to transcend conscious existence into potential between the absolute. That's a very hard thing to do, and I'm afraid I'm getting better at it, but I'm not completely up to doing it in such a way that I can make it communicable. I got a little closer than
it. Something that exists together and apart at the same time.
Yeah.
I think it's two, but it's three.
I'm not familiar exactly with what you're talking about. If you have is this something that you work with in?
Just reading Hans Meyer's book about polarity of first and second order, and how the polarity of levity and gravity creates second order polarity, where you see. Oh yes.
That's in manifest creation, though. But it transcends and goes the other way. Yes, that's a way of looking at all of the worlds. Actually, the way you're describing it there, that from two basic worlds, all of the worlds can be suspended within in a polarity like that.
You talked about how levity and gravity create the pole in the chemical world, where you have phosphorus at one end and sulfur at the other, and phosphorus carries the two properties I've driven apart. They don't generally exist together. And the sulfur, they are combined, and you see levity and gravity together and manifesting.
Which book is this?
This is called Man on Matter.
No, okay.
The sulfur in its natural form is unoxidizable.
Yeah, that sounds like a much more clear presentation than the presentation of the same matter in The Nature of Substance. Have you ever read that by, oh boy, I can't think of the name, but he was an anthroposophical chemist. And no, but Rudolf Hauschka. Yeah. Yeah.
It's very interesting. There are many things I want to see more of, and he doesn't do because he just touches and
Yeah. I marvel at it, and I guess it's a fault of mine that I stay too much in the abstract or in the transcendent, because in my own way, I guess that's my own Luciferic tendency, that I don't want to let go of the light because I'm afraid of losing consciousness, and it would be nice if I could carry it all the way down, but that would be a whole different thing. Well, you got recorded a little bit, I guess, whether we intended it or not.